Keanu Reeves stood in his own kitchen, yet for the first time in years, he felt like a stranger there. The early morning sunlight filtered through the tall windows, bouncing off the spotless marble counters and rows of expensive utensils lined up like soldiers. It was supposed to be a place of warmth and peace, the heart of the house he had bought with his own sweat and dreams. But this morning, it felt cold, like the air itself was whispering that he didn't belong. He had woken up early, unable to sleep because something inside him felt wrong. The night before, he had overheard a conversation that crawled under his skin and stayed there, itching at the edges of his mind. The new chef, the man he had hired only 6 weeks ago, had been speaking with 2 other staff members, laughing about Keanu like he was a joke. They called him soft, called him foolish, said he didn't know how to live like a real star. "He thinks he's one of them," the chef had said, his voice dripping with poison. Always talking about kindness, feeding the homeless, letting strangers into his home. "It's pathetic. If I were him, I'd lock the doors and enjoy my money." Keanu had stood in the hallway, his hand resting on the wall, feeling the words slip under his skin like tiny knives. He had built this home to be a place of safety, not just for himself, but for anyone who needed it. In the winters, he let his staff bring their families in when the storms were bad. When a local shelter ran out of food last year, he emptied his pantry to help. To him, kindness was not a weakness. It was the one thing that made sense in a world that so often did in single quotes t. But now, standing in the kitchen at dawn, he wondered if he had been blind. He heard footsteps behind him and turned to see the chef walk in, wearing a crisp white uniform, sleeves rolled up, eyes bright but empty. The man didn't see Keanu at first. He barked orders at the young assistant by the sink, snapping his fingers like he owned the house. The assistant flinched, his eyes darting to Keanu for help. Keanu cleared his throat, his voice calm but firm. "Good morning, Liam." The chef froze. A flicker of annoyance crossed his face before he forced a fake smile. "Mr. Reeves, I didn't expect you to be up so early. Breakfast will be ready soon. Maybe you'd like to wait in the lounge?" Keanu didn't move. "I heard what you said last night." His words were soft but heavy, each syllable landing like a stone. The assistant stood still, his eyes wide, waiting for the explosion. But Keanu's voice stayed steady. "Is that how you feel about me? About this place?" Liam's mask cracked for a second, the arrogance slipping through like oil on water. "Sir, you shouldn't listen to kitchen talk. Staff need to let off steam. You've made this house too soft. People take advantage of you. Someone has to keep things under control." Keanu felt his jaw tighten. "By humiliating people, by calling kindness pathetic." Liam shrugged. "It's the real world, Mr. Reeves. You want to be everyone's savior, but you're just a meal ticket to half the people you help." The assistant sucked in a sharp breath, his cheeks flushed with shame. He had only been here 2 weeks, a young man named Miguel, fresh from culinary school, working long hours just to send money back to his family. Keanu looked at him now, seeing the fear in his eyes. "Miguel," Keanu said softly, ignoring Liam's scoff. "Did he treat you badly?" Miguel hesitated. Liam shot him a warning glare. The boy's shoulders sank, but then his eyes met Keanu's, and something steadied inside him. "Yes, sir," he whispered. "He calls me useless. He throws away food when no one's looking. He says poor people don't deserve good leftovers. I'm sorry, sir. I didn't want to say anything." Keanu's heart squeezed painfully. He thought of all the nights he'd sat at this very counter, sharing leftover soup with old friends, strangers, even homeless people he'd found on the street. Food was never just food to him. It was a way to say, "You matter, you belong." And here was a man he had trusted, standing in his kitchen, twisting that kindness into a reason for mockery. Keanu took a deep breath. The silence in the kitchen was so thick it hummed in his ears. "Liam," he said, his voice gentle but unyielding, "pack your things. You're done here." The chef laughed, but it came out sharp, brittle. "You can't be serious. I've worked for bigger stars than you. You'll regret this." Keanu shook his head. "No, I regret letting someone like you stand here and make good people feel small. I'd rather eat burnt toast alone than have you poison this house." Miguel's eyes shone with something like relief, but he still looked terrified. After Liam stormed out, muttering threats under his breath, Keanu turned to Miguel. "Come on," he said, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Help me make breakfast. I haven't cooked in ages." The young man stared at him. "You want me to stay?" he asked, voice shaking. "I want you to stay," Keanu said, pulling eggs from the fridge. "And when we're done here, we're taking this food to the shelter down the street. Nobody should go hungry while we have more than enough." Miguel nodded, his hands trembling as he reached for a pan. He had come here hoping for a job. Now, in this quiet kitchen where the sun finally felt warm again, he felt like he'd found something much bigger: respect, a place where kindness wasn't a weakness, but the very thing that made people strong. As the smell of fresh eggs and toast filled the kitchen, Keanu felt something settle deep in his chest. He had been humiliated by a man who thought kindness was soft, but the truth was clear as the sunlight on the counter. Kindness was his armor. It was what made this house a home, and no one would ever take that away from him. Keanu sat at the old wooden kitchen table, watching Miguel stir the eggs in the pan. The air smelled of butter and toast, warm and familiar. For the first time in weeks, his own kitchen felt like his again, not just spotless and cold, but alive. He could see the nervousness in Miguel's shoulders, the way the young man flinched every time the pan hissed too loudly. "You're doing great," Keanu said softly. Miguel glanced at him, eyes wide, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth before he looked back at the stove. They ate together in that sunlit kitchen: scrambled eggs, toast, fresh fruit. Nothing fancy, but each bite tasted like more than food. It tasted like a promise that this house would never again be a place where people felt small. After they cleared the plates, Keanu leaned back in his chair, thinking about what needed to be done. He knew Liam would try to twist the story. He could already imagine the headlines: "Keanu fires chef in early morning meltdown." People loved to make kindness look like foolishness. They loved to say that being soft was the same as being weak. But he didn't care anymore. He had seen too much in his life to let the world's cruelty change the core of who he was. "Miguel," he said, his voice calm but strong, "I want you to keep working here, but not as an assistant. I want you to run the kitchen." Miguel's spoon clattered into the sink. "Sir, Mr. Reeves, I can't. I'm not ready. I just finished school. I'm no chef, not like him." Keanu shook his head. "You're not like him. That's the point. You respect the food. You respect people. That's all I care about." Miguel sat down, his hands shaking. "But the other staff, they might not listen to me. They might think I'm too young." Keanu looked him in the eye. "Then they'll answer to me." For a moment, Miguel said nothing. Then he let out a breath that sounded like a weight leaving his chest. "Okay," he whispered. "I'll try." They packed up what they could: trays of leftover fruit, bread, and pastries that would only go stale. They loaded everything into Keanu's old truck, the one he liked to drive when he wanted to feel real and close to the ground. They didn't tell anyone where they were going. They just went. The shelter was a few blocks away, tucked between an empty lot and a row of tiny stores. It was run by an older woman named Mrs. Garcia, a kind soul who had known Keanu long before the world did. When they arrived, she was sweeping the front steps, her thin shoulders bent but strong as ever. "KeanuReeves," she said, laughing as he jumped from the truck with a bag of bread under one arm. "You always bring the sunshine, even when you don't mean to." He grinned, hugging her gently. "And you always keep this place warm," he said. They unloaded the food together, Miguel working quietly, not quite sure how to fit into this tiny, bustling place. But Mrs. Garcia noticed him right away. "And who's this?" she asked. "Miguel," Keanu said, clapping a hand on the young man's shoulder. "The best new chef in town." Miguel blushed, ducking his head. Mrs. Garcia studied him with eyes that saw straight through people. She nodded once, approving. "Good. We need more people like you." Inside, the shelter smelled of soup and fresh bread, of warm coffee and tired hope. People sat at long tables, some laughing, some staring into their mugs, lost in thought. Keanu greeted each one, remembering names when he could. asking about families, jobs, dreams that hadn't died yet. Miguel watched him, amazed. He had never seen someone like Keanu, someone so famous, yet so completely ordinary when he was here. There were no cameras, no flashing lights, just a man who wanted people to feel seen. After serving food and washing dishes with the volunteers, Keanu sat with a boy named Sammy, no older than 12, his coat too big for his thin shoulders. Sammy talked about school, about how he wanted to be a scientist someday. Even though he didn't always have a place to sleep, Keanu listened like every word mattered. Miguel stood by the door, drying his hands on a towel, feeling something shift inside him. He thought of Liam's cruel words, that kindness was pathetic, that the poor didn't deserve the best, and he thought about this warm place, where food and conversation were enough to remind people they still had worth. After they finished, Keanu and Miguel walked back to the truck. The sun was high now, the city noisy and busy around them. Keanu paused by the driver's door. Looking at Miguel, "You okay?" he asked. Miguel nodded slowly. "Better than okay. I don't know, proud." Keanu smiled. "Good, that's how it should feel." They drove back in silence for a while, the hum of the engine the only sound between them. Then Miguel spoke, his voice quiet but clear. "Liam was wrong, wasn't he?" "About what?" Keanu asked, even though he already knew. "About kindness. About it being weak." Keanu turned his eyes to the road ahead, watching the sunlight dance on the hood of the truck. "Kindness isn't weakness," he said. "It's the only thing that makes us strong enough to live in this world." Miguel let the words sink in, the truth of them settling deep in his bones. By the time they pulled up to the house again, he knew that this was more than just a job. This was a chance to stand for something bigger, to protect the warmth that kindness brought into the walls of a place that would always be a home, not just for one man, but for everyone who believed in respect, humility, resilience, and a love that couldn't be humiliated by anyone ever again. When word spread that Keanu had fired the chef, the house staff buzzed with whispers. Some people wondered if the stories were true. Others said Keanu had finally lost his patience. But for the people who had worked for him the longest, the housekeeper Mrs. Lee, the gardener Amir, and old Jose the driver, they knew the truth. Keanu wasn't a man who fired people without reason. If he had asked someone to leave, there had to be a reason rooted deeper than pride. Miguel felt that truth every morning as he stepped into the kitchen. At first, the older staff were cautious around him. He was so young, his hands still shaky. When he sliced vegetables or tried to remember the difference between fancy cuts of beef. But what he didn't have in years, he had in something better: respect for the food, respect for the people who would eat it, and a soft voice that never snapped or barked orders. It was hard work. Some days, he thought of quitting. When he messed up a sauce or dropped a pan or saw the skeptical glances of the older kitchen help, a small voice inside told him he wasn't ready. But every time, Keanu would come by, roll up his sleeves, and say, "Come on, Miguel, let's fix it together." One morning, the staff arrived to find a letter taped to the kitchen door. Miguel had written it late the night before, his handwriting neat and careful. It read, "This kitchen will never waste food again. If we have leftovers, they go to the shelter. If anyone is hungry, they eat. Nobody is too small to matter here." Some of the older staff scoffed at first. "What does a boy know?" they said. But by the end of the week, when Mrs. Garcia showed up at the door to thank them, her arms full of thank you notes from the shelter, even the biggest skeptics felt something shift. Keanu watched all this quietly, the way he always did. He was in and out of the kitchen more often now, standing with Miguel while he tested recipes, sometimes burning them, sometimes creating flavors that surprised even him. One evening, Keanu sat at the long kitchen island, sipping tea while Miguel chopped onions. The sunset made the whole kitchen glow gold and pink, shadows stretching across the spotless counters. "You've done well, Miguel," Keanu said. "The kitchen feels like a family again." Miguel laughed nervously. "I still mess up too much." Keanu shrugged. "So do I. It's not about being perfect. It's about caring enough to fix what's wrong." Miguel's hands paused. "Is that why you didn't get angry when Liam talked about you?" Keanu looked at the steam rising from his mug. When people mock kindness, it's because they're afraid of what they don't understand, he said softly. They think it makes them strong to be cruel. But real strength is staying soft in a hard world. Miguel let the words settle between them like the scent of warm bread. He wanted to ask more, but a knock at the back door interrupted them. Keanu rose and opened the door to find a young woman standing there, soaked from the unexpected rain. She held a small child on her hip, the girl's shoes wrapped in plastic bags to keep out the water. The woman looked exhausted, her eyes red but determined. "I'm sorry to bother you," she said, her voice shaking. "I heard you sometimes. Help," she trailed off, unable to finish. Keanu didn't hesitate. He stepped aside, his voice gentle. "Come in, you're safe here." Miguel watched as the woman stepped inside, her shoulders sagging with relief. He saw how Keanu spoke to her, not like she was a burden, but like she was family. Miguel found towels, helped warm up milk for the child, and sat with the little girl while her mother told Keanu her story. How they'd lost their apartment when the rent doubled. How she'd been sleeping in her car, afraid each night that someone would knock on the window and tell her to leave. "Stay tonight," Keanu said, his voice steady. "Tomorrow we'll figure it out. You and your daughter won't be on the street again." The mother broke down, covering her face with her hands, sobs shaking her thin shoulders. Miguel looked at Keanu and understood, maybe for the first time, why this house felt so different. It wasn't just a big mansion for show. It was a sanctuary, not perfect, but real. Later that night, after they found clean clothes and a warm room for the woman and her child, Keanu and Miguel sat again in the quiet kitchen. Miguel poured 2 mugs of tea, his hands finally steady. "People are going to say you're foolish again," Miguel said softly. Keanu smiled, his eyes tired but warm. "Let them," he said. "The world needs more foolish people if this is what foolishness looks like." Miguel nodded, feeling that truth pressed deep into his chest. Upstairs, the child slept in a warm bed, her mother's arms wrapped around her, their breathing calm at last. Downstairs, in the heart of the house, a young chef and a movie star who never let fame harden his soul sat side by side, sharing tea and the quiet knowledge that kindness was not weakness. It was the only thing that could hold a broken world. Together, the morning after the rain, sunlight filled Keanu's kitchen like a soft blessing. Miguel was up before dawn, stirring a pot of oatmeal while fresh bread baked in the oven. He moved with more confidence now, sleeves rolled up, hair tied back, his face warm with purpose. Keanu walked in quietly, careful not to wake the woman and her daughter who were sleeping in the guest room upstairs. He poured himself a cup of coffee and leaned against the counter, watching Miguel work. It reminded him of all the times he had stood here alone, eating cereal in the dark because he didn't want to bother anyone. How different this room felt. Now, alive, breathing, human. "How did you sleep?" Keanu asked. Miguel smiled shyly, like a baby. "Boss, that little girl. When I saw her fall asleep last night, I knew I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Keanu nodded. "You are." The knock on the door that morning wasn't angry. It was soft, careful. Mrs. Garcia stood on the porch, her hands folded tight, around an old umbrella. Keanu opened the door with a warm smile. "Mrs. Garcia," he said, stepping aside. "You're always welcome." She stepped in, her sharp eyes scanning the kitchen. She nodded in approval when she saw Miguel at work. "I heard you helped Maria," she said, lowering her voice so the sleeping guests wouldn't hear. Keanu nodded. "She and her little girl will stay until they're ready. I'll find them something permanent." Mrs. Garcia let out a small, proud laugh. "When you first came to my shelter all those years ago, you were the quietest boy I'd ever met. I knew you'd grow into the kind of man who wouldn't forget where he came from." Keanu's face softened. He remembered those days, his mother working 2 jobs, his fridge empty more than full. The times he had sat at Mrs. Garcia's shelter table, eating soup that tasted like hope. "It's the least I can do," he said. But Mrs. Garcia wasn't finished. She turned to Miguel. "And you've turned this house into a place where leftovers feed more than garbage bins. That's the work that matters. You should be proud, boy." Miguel's cheeks flushed pink, but he stood straighter. "Thank you, Mum," he said. They made extra oatmeal that morning. When Maria and her daughter came down, still sleepy-eyed but clean and safe, Keanu made a small table for them by the window, sunlight streaming in like a promise that things could be different. Maria ate slowly, tears slipping down her cheeks. When her daughter giggled over her spoon, Miguel stepped aside, wiping his hands on a towel. "How long will they stay?" he asked Keanu later, when they were alone again. "As long as they need to," Keanu said. "And when they're ready, we'll find them a home. Maybe you can help." Miguel blinked. "Me? How?" Keanu shrugged. "You know people. You see them. That's more than most people do." That afternoon, Keanu did something he hadn't done in years. He called every big magazine that had ever asked for an interview and said yes to one, but only on his terms. When the reporter came, expecting gossip or secrets about movies, Keanu sat him down in the same kitchen where Liam had once sneered at him. "People call kindness weak," Keanu said, his voice steady. "I want you to write about this house, this kitchen, this young man here. How he feeds people who can't pay. How the food that would go to waste fills stomachs instead of trash cans. How every act of kindness we do in here ripples out to the street, the city, the world. If you're going to write about me, write about that." The reporter tried to twist it, tried to find an angle that would make it sound like a publicity stunt, but Keanu refused to let the man spin it. "Print the truth," he said, pointing at Miguel. "He's the story, not me." The article came out a week later. It surprised everyone. A photo of Miguel in the kitchen, smiling shyly beside loaves of fresh bread, with Keanu washing dishes in the background like an ordinary man. The headline read, "Keanu Reeves fired his chef for mocking kindness. Now his kitchen feeds a neighborhood." The response was immediate. People drove past the gate just to leave bags of groceries and handwritten notes at the front door. Mrs. Garcia's shelter was flooded with donations from people who had never cared before. Even the people who used to whisper that Keanu was naive now stood in line to help. One night, as the kitchen quieted down, Miguel found Keanu sitting at the table, staring out the window at the moonlight on the garden. "Boss," Miguel said softly, "aren't you tired? You could just close the door and live like the other stars. No more strangers, no more trouble." Keanu smiled, a tired but peaceful smile. "If I closed the door, Miguel, I'd be alone in a house full of empty rooms." "What good is that?" Miguel sat down across from him. "Liam was wrong." "Huh, so wrong," Keanu said. "He thought humiliation would break me. But kindness isn't something you can break. It only grows stronger when people try." In the rooms above them, Maria and her little girl slept safely in the streets outside. The city hummed, cold and hard, but touched now by something warmer. Then fame, richer than money. And in that kitchen, a young chef and a man who refused to change for the world sat quietly, knowing they were changing the world instead. Weeks turned into months, but the warmth inside Keanu's home only grew. What had started with a single act, firing a man who mocked kindness, had become a quiet revolution that nobody could stop talking about. People from faraway places sent letters, some asking for help, some offering it. Mrs. Garcia's shelter expanded with the extra donations, adding more beds, fixing old pipes that had leaked for years. But not everyone was happy. There were always people who hated what they didn't understand. Every few days, Miguel would find a rude note stuck to the gate. "Stop feeding beggars," or "He's just doing this for attention." Sometimes the tabloids twisted Keanu's story, saying he was only pretending to be humble, that he'd get tired of playing hero once the cameras went away. One morning, Miguel stood by the front door, holding one of those hateful notes, his hands shaking. "Why do they keep saying this stuff?" he asked Keanu, who was arranging boxes of fresh vegetables a local farm had donated. Keanu looked at the note, then at Miguel's tight face. He took it gently and crumpled it in his hand. "Because it's easier to mock hope than to fix what's broken," he said. "But you can't let it poison you. You're not doing this for them." "Then who are we doing it for?" Miguel asked. Keanu didn't hesitate. "For the ones who need it. For the ones who'd knock on this door on a rainy night with nowhere else to go." That afternoon, They drove the truck to the shelter with more leftover soup and fresh bread. Miguel sat beside Keanu, still frowning at the window. The city rolled past. The noise and lights and broken sidewalks. "Boss," Miguel said, voice low. "Do you think people like Liam, do they ever change?" Keanu thought about that for a moment, his eyes soft but steady. "Maybe. But we can't wait for them to. We have to keep doing what's right, even when they don't." At the shelter, Mrs. Garcia was waiting for them. She hugged Miguel, her arms strong around his shoulders. "Boy," she said, "I see the way you carry the heavy parts of this. Don't forget, you can't pour from an empty cup. You have to let others lift you too." Miguel nodded, trying to hide how much her words meant. They spent the day serving food, listening to people's stories, cleaning up after the last bowls were washed later. Back at the house, Keanu invited all the staff, not just the cooks, but the cleaners, the gardeners, the drivers, to sit together in the dining room. It was the first time some of them had ever sat at that long table. Instead of standing quietly in the shadows, when everyone was there, Keanu stood at the head of the table. "I want you all to know something," he said. "This house doesn't work because of me. It works because of you. Because you show up every day with open hands and open hearts. Nobody here is small. Nobody here is less than anyone else." He turned to Miguel, who sat stiffly in his chair, eyes wide. "And you," Keanu said, "you remind me every day that kindness isn't something you hire or fire. It's something you share until it spreads." There were tears in a few eyes that night. Mrs. Lee, the housekeeper, dabbing her eyes with her apron. Old Jose, the driver, nodding with a grin so wide his wrinkles folded around it like a map of a long, hard life that had finally led to a good place. When the meal was done, Miguel slipped outside for some air. He stood by the garden gate looking at the moon hanging low over the trees. He heard footsteps and turned to see Keanu there, hands in his pockets. "I don't know how to be like you," Miguel said quietly. "Some days I'm still scared, like maybe I'm not enough." Keanu stepped closer, resting a hand on the young man's shoulder. "You don't have to be like me," he said. "Just be you. You're enough. More than enough." Miguel stared at him, the words wrapping around his heart like a warm blanket. "Liam said you'd regret keeping people like me," he said. "Did you ever?" Keanu shook his head. "Never, not for a second. I regret not doing this sooner, letting people feel unseen under my own roof. But I don't regret choosing you." From the open window, they heard laughter, the sound of people who had spent too many years alone, now sitting side by side, sharing leftovers and stories like a family. In that moment, Miguel realized that maybe this was what family really meant. Not just blood, not just a name on paper, but people who chose to stand beside each other. Even when the world sneered, he looked at Keanu, his eyes clear in the moonlight. "I'm gonna keep this going, boss, even if you're not here one day." Keanu smiled, his face soft and honest. "That's all I ever wanted." The wind moved through the garden, carrying away old fears, old cruelty, leaving behind the warm truth that no humiliation, no mockery could ever kill the stubborn power of a single act of kindness, or the people brave enough to keep doing it again and again. The seasons changed. Leaves turned gold and fell like soft confetti over the garden that Miguel now tended with quiet pride on his days off from the kitchen. Mrs. Garcia's shelter was warmer that winter than ever before. No one went to bed hungry if they knocked on Keanu's door. More and more people came by not because they wanted charity, but because they wanted to be part of something bigger, a circle of people who believed kindness was worth defending. Even when the world tried to tear it down, that one cold morning, a letter arrived for Miguel. It was hand-delivered by a young woman he didn't know. She looked at him, shy but determined. "He said you'd understand," she whispered before slipping away. Inside the envelope was a single sheet of paper. It was from Liam, the chef who had humiliated Keanu, mocked his kindness, and left with his head high and his heart locked tight. Miguel read the letter 3 times before he sat down at the kitchen table, the same one where he'd once been, too afraid to hold a spoon steady. "Dear Miguel, I don't expect you to forgive me. I know what I did. I've lost 4 jobs since I left that house. Every kitchen feels cold every plate tastes empty. I see your face sometimes when I close my eyes, you standing behind Keanu when he told me to go. I didn't understand then. I thought kindness made people soft. I thought respect was earned by fear. But your kitchen proved me wrong. Your story made the papers. People talk about you now. The young chef who turned leftovers into hope. I don't deserve it. But I hope you never stop. Maybe you'll think of me sometimes, not to hate me, but to remind you why kindness matters. Miguel folded the letter and set it aside. His hands weren't shaking anymore. Keanu walked in just then, carrying a box of fresh vegetables from the garden, dirt still clinging to his boots. He took one look at Miguel's face and knew something had shifted. Bad news? Keanu asked, setting the box on the counter. Miguel shook his head. No, boss, just a reminder. Keanu raised an eyebrow. A reminder of what? Miguel looked around the kitchen, the soft light spilling through the windows, the smell of fresh bread baking in the oven, the faint laughter drifting in from the hallway where the staff were setting the table for another shared meal. That we're doing it right, Miguel said. That no matter what people say, no matter how they try to twist it, kindness wins. Keanu grinned, the lines around his eyes crinkling with that same unshakable warmth. That had changed Miguel's whole world. Yeah, he said, his voice low and certain. It always does. Later that evening, they served dinner not just to the staff, but to anyone who needed it. Mrs. Garcia's volunteers, a mother with her teenage son who had just moved out of their car and into a tiny apartment, an old man who had once slept behind the shelter and now tended its vegetable patch. They sat side by side at the long table, paper plates piled high with simple, hearty food. No one asked for thanks. No one asked for praise. Miguel stood at the head of the table this time. It was Keanu's idea. They need to know you're the heart of this, Keanu had whispered before he sat down among everyone else like any other guest. Miguel cleared his throat, his voice steady now. When I first came here, I thought this kitchen was just a job, he began. But I was wrong. It's a place where no one is less than anyone else, where food isn't wasted and people aren't forgotten, where a man who could close his doors keeps them open instead. His eyes met Keanu's across the table. Kindness isn't weakness, Miguel said. It's what makes us strong enough to stand up to people who don't understand yet. And maybe, just maybe, we help them understand too. The old man clapped. First, then Mrs. Garcia. Soon the whole room was full of soft applause. Not the loud kind you find at fancy events, but the real kind, the sound of people recognizing something good in each other. After the plates were cleared, Miguel found Keanu in the garden under the stars. The wind was cold, but the house behind them glowed with light and laughter. Boss, Miguel said, his voice calm and full. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd stayed quiet that morning? If you'd let Liam keep running? Your kitchen. Keanu didn't look away from the sky. Sometimes, he said. Then I remember, humiliation can make you feel small, but standing up for what's right makes you feel real. Liam didn't humiliate me that day. He reminded me why I am who I am. Miguel nodded. I think he knows that now too. Keanu turned to him, his smile as honest as it was the first day he'd said, pack your things. You're done here. You're the proof, Miguel, he said. You in this house and every warm meal that goes out the door. In the distance, they heard Maria's daughter laugh through the kitchen window, a sound that didn't exist here before, now woven into the walls like a promise that kindness would always live here, no matter who tried to tear it down. And under the stars, in the quiet garden, two men stood together, one who never let the world's cruelty steal his softness, and one who had learned that no humiliation, no mocking word, no act of hate could ever kill the power of simple, stubborn acts of kindness.